But as with most strong men leaders, underneath the veneer of power lies insecurity and fear.
So Nicola Sturgeon's talking about strong men leaders, not authoritarian, aggressive, evil leaders, strong men. Now, we might have just let that pass, but we already know that Nicola Sturgeon is a female supremacist who thinks that women are better than men, especially as leaders of nations. So as far as Nicola Sturgeon is concerned, Putin's problem, it's something to do with, somehow related to the fact that he's a man. It's to do with maleness. Now you may say, oh, don't be silly. People don't really think that, do they? Well, I was driving up to the family party meeting in Stirling yesterday evening in the car, and I listened to Radio 4. And I sometimes think I should do an experiment, because I don't think I should time how long it is on Radio 4 between turning on the radio and hearing something about racism, sexism, LGBT, climate change, the things they're always talking about. If I did that, I think the average would be about 5 seconds. But anyway, I just happened to listen to this gem. See what you think of this.
But you have to understand Putin's part of a system. And the system is this phenomenon that we call authoritarian populism, right-wing populism. It's a sort of combination of crony capitalists, racism or ethnic nationalism, and also, I'd say, a kind of toxic masculinity. And it's the same phenomenon as Trump. And that's what we should be worried about, is the phenomenon. Because what we've seen in Russia is the way it can evolve into aggressive behaviour. And we see it in Hungary, we see it in Poland. I think we saw it in elements of the Brexit phenomenon. So we really need to resist this phenomenon, and resisting this phenomenon means...
it's very different, isn't it? Why you've sort of extended Putinism beyond to quite a wide...
Well, I don't think it is so different. Look.
So according to this academic professor, Putin, again, is not so much evil, aggressive, oppressive. Big part of the problem, toxic masculinity. He's an example, a part of the toxic masculinity movement, if you like. I mean, that was so ridiculous. Even the BBC presenter laughed. I mean, you really are off the spectrum in this area if the BBC presenter laughs at you. So she was saying that to fight Russia, to fight Putin, we don't need military power. What we need to do instead is fight the toxic masculinity of Putin, Trump, and Brexit. What? Now, I would imagine that you're listening to that, just thinking that is just so completely ridiculous, it's laughable. But how many MSPs in the Scottish Parliament would actually think, yeah, that's a good point, I quite agree? I would say quite a lot. I would suggest even a majority. Now, to the ones who maybe don't agree with it, do they really understand the problem? Would they want to argue against it and push back? Or do they not really care? I'd say they don't really care. Now, if Nicola Sturgeon is so concerned about sexism, which she isn't, she is a sexist. She doesn't want equality. She wants to favour women and to denigrate men. Now, in the Ukraine at the moment, working age men between 18 and 60 are not allowed to leave the country, because the Ukrainian leadership is saying your responsibility is to be here in the country fighting, if you want to. It's not compulsory, it's not a conscription, but they're urging civilians to take up arms and to do what they can to protect their country. Whereas women and children are allowed to leave the country and head for a safe haven. Now, we often hear from Nicola Sturgeon, from all the Scottish feminist organisations, doesn't matter what the issue is, they always say it affects women disproportionately. Whatever issue is coming next in Scotland, it doesn't matter what it is, they will say it affects women disproportionately. Women are getting a real raw deal in this. Now let's imagine this situation in the Ukraine. Let's imagine the Ukrainian government had said men can flee to other countries, but women, they've got to stay behind and fight. We're going to kick them out with guns. They've got to stay in the danger zone and face the terrors of war. What would Nicola Sturgeon have to say about that? She would be outraged. She would be up in arms. This would be sex discrimination of the most egregious type. And, well, I mean, who knows? Who knows what rhetoric she would come out with. But I think that just shows that Nicola Sturgeon is not an equality campaigner. She doesn't actually want just men and women to be treated the same, because, I mean, that already happens in virtually every situation. She is a female supremacist. So anything where it appears that men are getting a raw deal, or the more difficult deal, then she doesn't care about that at all. Now, I would say about the Ukraine, do I agree with their policy? Who knows what's the best policy in that situation? But I wouldn't say I particularly object to it. I do feel that, the sort of women and children first mentality has something to recommend it. Just on that issue, I've often thought over the years that there's something relevant to this in terms of immigration. I was heard on the radio as well, a Scottish family who lived in Ukraine, I think, for some decades, but they were now leaving because of the danger. Absolutely fair enough. I'm not criticising them at all. But while people from other countries, basically immigrants to Ukraine, were getting out, a lot of the natives were getting guns ready to defend their homeland. I thought that's an interesting contrast, isn't it? Because for any nation, there'll be a proportion of people who will see themselves as, that this is our nation, this is our homeland, we're going to defend it and it will be loyal to it. And there'll be other people who will be thinking, well, I'm living here at the moment, but that's just because it suits me. I'm here because this country is providing what I need at this stage of my life, but maybe at some point in the future I'll go somewhere else. I'm not really committed to it. Now, it's not that simple to say that immigrants are not committed. People who've lived here all their life are. There's some immigrants who might be very committed to a nation, and there's some natives who are not committed to it at all. But overall, I think this proportion and this degree of loyalty to a nation is important. And the weaker it is, then the weaker that nation is going to be in times of crisis, such as this for the Ukraine. So I think it's important for a nation to work on that sense of solidarity, unity, and loyalty. Right, moving on. Russia had the highest number of abortions per woman of childbearing age in the world, according to UN data, as of 2010. I think they've slipped down to maybe the second highest in the world now. 2019, 621,000 abortions. 1 in 3 pregnancies ending in abortion. In some previous decades, there were more abortions than live births in Russia. So let's have a look at a few snippets about that. Russia announces plan to halve abortion rates to spur population growth. They're concerned about population decline, and abortion is a major factor in that. That's just the demographics of Russia at the moment. You can see on the right-hand side, the bars get shorter. That's at older ages, so that's what we expect to happen. If you look at the left, though, the left-hand half a dozen bars are much shorter, and that's showing smaller numbers in the lower age groups. So that's showing population decline on the way, and it will accelerate in the future. This graph here shows the fertility rate, and it's the grey line we need to look at. It's down at 1.51 there. I mean, that's pretty low. I mean, it's not as low as Scotland's disastrous 1.37, but it is a big concern for Russia. Number of marriages in Russia, that's the blue line, plummeting. When the number of marriages plummets, the number of children born plummets as well. So they've got a lot to be worrying about there. Last year, the Russian population declined by over a million in 1 year. A part of that was due to coronavirus, but part of it was just due to the population shrinkage that Russia is experiencing. Now, from Putin's point of view, he wants to make Russia a great power. He wants it to have an even bigger military machine. So he needs people. So they've been trying to implement policies in Russia to increase the fertility rate. They've had some success, but not enough success as far as he is concerned. Now, we're concerned about demographic issues in Scotland, not because we want to make like a huge military to domineer neighbouring countries, but because we want to be able to supply a welfare system and NHS, etc. So that's very different. But that's what Putin is thinking. So if you're really short of people, you've been trying everything you can think of to try and increase fertility rates to stop your population declining. What else could you do? Well, if you can't make your own people, maybe you can take over some other people. Now, Putin hasn't stated that at any point as a reason for the invasion of the Ukraine, and it's certainly not the main reason for it, but I think it's reasonable to think that it's a factor in Putin's apparent desire to integrate Ukraine into Russia. If population decline is a critical concern, as it is in Russia, I mean, they lost 1 million people last year, then gaining 40 million new people this year must surely look very attractive. Now, as far as the wider view on the Russia-Ukraine issue, I wrote something I've put on YouTube in the community section. It's posted on Facebook as well. And it's very straightforward. But what I was trying to do in writing it is just try and urge people to be careful not to be drawn into sort of extreme, sort of unreasonable conspiracy theory-based, contrarian. By contrarian, I mean just saying the opposite to everyone else just for the sake of it. Because every time a new issue comes along, it's not too strong a word to say, I find myself upset at seeing good people ending up believing things that really undermine their credibility. So what I was doing and what I've written there, just urging people to keep their balance. Just because most people think something doesn't mean it's not true. Okay? Just because the BBC reports it doesn't mean it's not true. Okay? So just weigh up issues for yourself, listen to all different sources, but it's just trying to urge people to keep their balance. And that's probably the best way to put it. So do have a read of that. And a little reminder on Sunday at 1 o'clock in Glasgow, outside the BBC Scotland offices at Pacific Quay. There will be a demonstration about the sex survey in schools. I'll be speaking at it. We'll cover other issues as well, sex education, transgender guidance, etc. So that's 1 o'clock outside BBC Scotland in Glasgow. So that's organised by Glasgow Cabby. The last time he organised one, there was a good crowd there, and we're hoping for an even bigger crowd. So do come along, bring people with you, and it would be great to see you there.